Hi, everyone. My name is Emily, and I'll be co-hosting this panel along with Giulia. And today we're going to have an awesome topic on conversational AI strategy. So I feel like the strategy is kind of what makes or breaks an experience, but people kind of don't realize or kind of don't invest the time or effort to really understand what they need to be successful. So that could lead to a lot of bad experiences, which is why we want to raise awareness and talk about what makes a good conversational AI strategy and a lot more. So let's get started with introductions, and then we'll jump into the questions. Susan, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. I am Susan Westwater. I've been an AI strategist since founding Pragmatic Digital back in 2017. Also, a co-author of two books, Voice Strategy and Voice Marketing, and have worked on enterprise as well as small to medium business size solutions that are conversational AI, but also just marketing AI as well.
Awesome. Guilherme?
Yes, so I'm Guilherme Quelhos. I'm Brazilian, based in London right now, and I'm helping companies to deploy conversational AI solutions, contact center solutions, and CX solutions. I have been working this market for almost 20 years, so yeah, I have some experience to share with everyone, I guess.
Just a little experience.
A little bit.
JD?
Yep. So JD Ackley, I lead Razor AI. We are a conversational delivery and services company. As you said, I've been doing this for over 20 years now. And 5 years ago, if you asked me if I'd be an AI subject matter expert, I would have laughed. But I've been in the customer experience and contact center world using natural language, as we used to call it, and machine learning for quite some time. So really happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. Ben?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Ben McCulloch. I started as a musician, actually studying some Brazilian music. It's nice to hear that Guilherme is from Brazil. I was studying Tropicalia like 20 years ago now, but fantastic Brazilian music. And then that took me to sound engineering, which took me to working with lots of voice actors, which took me to localization, and then I discovered conversation design. So that's like 15 years of development wrapped up in one sentence. And since discovering conversation design, I've been working with UX World, like delivering bots for clients. And it's interesting there because we're a small team doing content and consultancy, and on the consultancy side, I kind of wear a few hats, as do we all. But coming from conversation design, and I've done a bit of localization there, and I write a lot of content. And what's happening now is that I'm getting involved more in the strategy side. Kane is really strong on strategy, Kane Sims, as in the boss of UX World. And so I'm helping out, I'm basically now getting my feet wet. So it's really interesting to come to this talk and like see how well I can, regurgitate basically what I know, what that's the wrong word, regurgitate. I could have used a much better word, but I think you know what I mean.
Yes.
So yeah, basically, I've been studying service design this year with a view to bringing that to AI strategy. And yeah, I'll shut up now, but basically that's where I'm coming from.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. So the first question I have is, what do most companies get wrong about conversational AI strategy? And I know this is a lot to unpack, but
yeah, for sure. We have a lot of topics to talk about this when we are talking about conversation AI and strategy. There's so many topics of channels, users, and users, companies. It depends on each market as well. I would say that most of the customers are not defining a clear strategy. When I say strategy, they are not even, most of them at least are not even thinking about it, how to create one and why define one. And at least for what I can see from my experience, it's just enabling one channel. So everyone right now is talking about a chatbot. So just enable one chatbot. Let's migrate or start a new chatbot project without thinking in the long term.
Yeah, I would say too, like, I think I heard a stat last week of Voice and AI from OpenAI of like 85% of companies have AI as a priority, and only 30% of them have an actual AI strategy. So I think that the big thing they're getting wrong is they're not having a strategy. It's a lot of fire, ready, aim, and failing faster, great. We can fail smarter, as I laughingly say, or smile, like learn. And I think that that's part of it, of getting a little too caught up in the tech and not thinking about the problems to be solved. So we might be building great experiences, but they're not actually serving what our audience actually is clamoring for. So I think it's that need to right size and think through that, and then have a strategy of here's how we're going to go through that, because I don't think anyone gets budgets of $1 million and come back in 18 months with something fancy. Like, it's kind of having that methodical way forward.
Yeah, if I can add sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, to riff right off of that, these huge expectations, budgets, and then the time. I mean, boiling the ocean is what we constantly run into, because the platforms to this point are amazing, and they're doing so many things, and every manufacturer puts up all these use cases, and customers' eyes get so wide that they can do so much, and then the scope is, well, we want to do this. And yeah, it's just to narrow that down to something attainable, deliverable in a quick amount of time, to really show what it can do, and convince them that the use cases build themselves. Once we have a toehold and we've done the legwork of the connectivity and the behind the scenes, difficult parts that always happen in every project, they take off. But there's so many organizations get stuck in, they want it all and they want it now, and there's so many stakeholders that all want to have something deployed. It's always difficult, and the ones I've seen fall over because they're too big to even get off the ground.
Yeah. You basically took the words right out of my mouth. But yeah, it seems that the danger is when someone doesn't have a strategy, that they get caught up in the hype, and they even get, every platform will come to them and say to them, hey, we can do all of this amazing stuff. And then it's like, oh, well, that sounds great. But really, what's best for your customers? What do they need that AI can service? And then how best can you implement that into your current organization? You can't change everything overnight.
So how do you actually, in building a strategy, how do you do this balance of like, okay, on the one hand, we have like this incredible innovation and like exciting new things with the functionality of the results, right?
For us, we typically start with workshopping and getting all these ideas on paper. I think it's fantastic to get everything out on the table, because then we can address it, prioritize it, and then the stakeholders can vie for their positions. But it's always starting with a really small toehold to get things going.
We like to start with if we can, and sometimes it'll be discovery, sometimes we'll call it assessment, where we start to talk to, if we can, actual users and then actual stakeholders within the organization, so that we can get a 360-degree view about what are the real problems. And part of this is because of 20 some years of working in marketing, ad agencies, and CX, of clients who come to you and say, I need X, and then you find out, actually, no, you need Y. So it is helping them understand that they're preparing them for it, and also being able to tie it back to what are the actual objectives you're trying to reach. Because as much as I'd love to say, oh, we always serve our users, we do, but we also have to serve that bottom line. So it's finding out what are those actual problems that they have before we even start thinking about a tech solution. Then we start to look at, okay, there's ways. Because I think art of the possible is super exciting, but it doesn't always get us. We get a lot of excitement, but direction becomes difficult. So it's sort of making sense of that if we can set those expectations from the start. And that's what, workshops and things like, and interviews are really helpful for that.
I like the expression that JG mentioned about, and I actually use as well. So don't try to boil the ocean. So try to find some really useful use cases for your end user, for your end customer. All companies have several issues, several complaints. They have already all the information about their top 10, for example. So based on those top 10, which top 5 or top 3 that we can automate, for example, or we can create some methods that we can simplify through a chatbot or a voice bot or any other channel, actually. So trying to focus on simple use cases, definitely.
Yeah, that's it. Mapping out the use cases and then finding where AI can actually work, seeing what other people have done and seeing what's actually functioning well and what isn't. We often hear about the really, the horrible car crashes, so to speak, where, like bots that, LLM based bots that are saying the things that the company doesn't want them to be talking about, or being, people being able to manipulate them into revealing the wrong kinds of data. So you hear these horror stories, but really, it's digging deeper and finding where things are really working. And, there's so many great ways to approach this, which I think the most obvious thing people think of is, oh, we need to implement AI and it needs to be customer facing. But there are really good examples of companies where they build something internal first, and then you really get to test it, work on it, get the trust of the team to make sure that they believe this can work. And then you're basically, you're collecting your data, you're working with it to make it strong enough that when you actually go live, it's something that you're sure is really working. That could work with perhaps a knowledge base like RAG system.
And when you say, like, because you mentioned we always see the horrible car crashes, but like, do you actively also look for like good examples in the market?
Yeah, that's I mean, in my own case, that's often just a case of listening to what Kane's talking about, because Kane Sims is interviewing people and finding out what's working, and we discuss that internally. So for me, that's how I do that. But I don't know. I think it would be great to hear other recommendations from everyone else here, like how you find the good examples.
I think we are still in an early stage, if I can say that, in order to implement RAG straight away in front of the customer without or with few guardrails at this moment. We will still see for a very long time more rule-based or even intent-based chatbots, bots in general. I think RAG will still have a little bit more time to have a more concrete and more not would say useful, but something that we can really trust in order to deliver value to the end customer.
Yeah, I think it also comes down to our community, right? We're all talking amongst each other. One of the things I think is also something that everyone needs to know is, like, just because someone's not talking about that work doesn't mean they're not doing it. Sometimes NDAs are not your best friend when it comes to socializing, but more so than that, it's also just I've got my head down figuring it out, but kind of hearing and seeing like different products, like going and looking and seeing what other folks have. It's also being parts of groups. Like there are a ton now, which is great, of industry specific groups that you can get into. One of them is sort of in the restaurant world, there's the Restaurant Technology Network. They actually have people come up and talk about, here are things that we're doing, or here are solutions that we have. So just kind of always constantly percolating and kind of stalking. And that's sort of when we were talking about sources. X has a bunch of non-conversational AI folks. It's always good to kind of see what they're saying, because it's been fun watching them all discover the power of voice as ChatGPT has become voice enabled. And then being like, see, we weren't crazy. It's really helpful and powerful. But looking and seeing, kind of looking at all those different groups and being a part of it. There's a couple Slack groups I'm a part of as well, of just hearing what others are doing, but also the questions that are coming from those who are brand new to AI or brand new to any of this, and just saying, how do I navigate this so that we can at least also make it welcoming and digestible for them as we're trying to get them on board.
Yeah, Giulia, you had me thinking there, where it seems the train wrecks are always top of mind. Everyone knows the bad ones, but I had an anecdote the other day that our marketing guy was sharing with his father what he was doing in this space, and he's kind of on the periphery of it. And he encouraged his dad to use it for booking on an airline, and something he was working through, and they were excited that they had a great experience with it and was encouraging. So it's great to see them in the wild working really well and seeing people doing great work.
Yeah. So I was curious, like how typically involved, like once you present a strategy, like, do you get involved with design and implementation as well, or does that depend with what you do? Susan, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. For me, it totally depends. Some of the teams we're working with, like, especially if we're starting with some traditional system persona, brand persona work of where we're looking at that conversational persona, I will then work, depending on the fidelity, I will be working with the conversation design team or the UX team a little more deeply as we think about how will this scale. I get to do some of the fun, good old school brand strategy work that then also then comes into play, which is really fun to know that, like, 20 years of my experience, they're still relevant. That's exciting, aside from just the tech side. But then what we will do is, it depends on that. It also depends on prioritization and road mapping. We'll go through that and talk in. So I might lead in the front part of where we're starting to do some of that discovery and define phase. And then I might dip back a little, but I'm always I become, like, on our race, being more informed or consulted, especially if there's questions of, like, how did we get here again? Because clients forget, and it's not in a bad way, just oh my gosh, helping them then feel studied along the way. That's definitely how we still stay involved, or working with the tech team of helping understand context as we're trying to come up with that implementation solution, to keep kind of that grounded. It's just basically who leads at that moment depends exactly on what the remit is of that particular stage.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, we're all the way through from making the sausage to getting it on the grocery store shelf. So we certainly start through workshopping and educational formats to get the word out there. And as integrators, we work all the way through the sales cycle into the complex delivery aspects and fixing hooks and building things. So we have a pretty big team following all the way through monitoring and testing. So we wind up being hands all the way in the grinder.
Yeah.
Yeah, one comment from my side is when Susan mentioned about persona, especially just remember that from when someone mentioned, I think it was one of the conversations, I cannot remember the name exactly right now, even especially when we are talking about persona, when we are not defining a bot persona, we are still defining a bot persona. So remember that as well. And the first time that I hear that, and I was implementing, of course, a chatbot that time, I was like, whoa, yeah, that makes sense. The way that I'm typing all the phrasings, all the prompts, I'm already defining anyhow, already a persona. So we need to think care about that as well, considering a conversational AI. So the bot persona and the user persona, or the users that are going to use that conversational AI platform or solution.
Yeah. And just to say, from my perspective, coming from conversation design, I'm sort of involved in some respect. So with one client, like, I've been doing user research, which is not obviously conversation design, but very important strand of it, or training. And, recently we were working with a client on their persona, which was really not doing the actual work, just overseeing and providing insight and feedback. And yeah, absolutely, with persona, it's always going to be perceived, regardless of whether you design it. People will perceive a persona. Yeah. So you want to be in control, right?
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, because we're all talking about different levels of involvement. I mean, on a case-by-case basis, on a company-by-company basis, and so on. But throughout the process, I'm curious if you find that you actually have to educate and guide people, because it sounded like, for example, from Guilherme, that maybe, people are coming up with, like, the persona topic already. Or is it, like, the case that by now people are already, like, aware of what needs to happen and, like, what are the different stages? Curious to hear.
That's a very good question, really hard to answer as well. I can see enterprise companies with not enough mature on AI topics yet. And I can see small companies which really have good maturity level in terms of concept, what is intent, utterances. On the other hand, enterprise companies, some people at least, even tech guys, are not able to talk about what is clearly what is outturns or intent. And then they normally mention about, hey, yeah, it seems AI is not working as well. AI is not smart enough. But then, yeah, it's our problem, right? We are not teaching correctly.
Yeah, I would echo that. We've spent the last 18 months heavily in an educational phase, and probably, even before that. But I mean, as ChatGPT became a household name, everyone had it, and now it's on everyone's budget. And we've had everything from CTOs and CEOs, in conversation behind doors saying, we have no idea what we're going to do, and that's up to us to do that education and kind of bring them up to speed. And as an organization that sells stuff, it's been a lot of lifting for us to sort through that chafe to find people who are actually moving forward and not just in education, right? So we've had to work hard to do a lot more education and be more proactive in that, in educating customers and really the art of the possible, and do it in a a very open way. So yeah, it's been very heavily in the educational phase of just the art of the possible, of what can be done, and then just the greater fears that are out there, and kind of sharing that with realistic examples and obtainable goals. I think that's a theme we keep on circling back to, is educating people on what's obtainable and what is a proper adoption and what's a good strategy look like.
Yeah. I mean, I was laughing. I spend a lot more time. I get spoiled when I get to go to Voice in AI, or I get to go to hear about Unparsed, of hearing everyone. This is the converted, right? And this is my favorite time of talking to those, as opposed to when I do go to like the Marketing AI Institute's conference and hearing how early the days are. I mean, we used to laugh back in 2017. It was early. Now I realize that was prehistoric, might have been Mesozoic, of how early it is. And that's not a scoff of like, I'm more evolved. It's more of a, people are still entering into that stream. So we constantly are educating. I think part of since we're often the first touch and the first time, managing that expectation of, again, as JD was talking about, that art of possible, like, here's what's realistic and here's what's promisable, of how to look at that. I find myself constantly educating, and it's fun because it's a coachable moment. Back in my content strategy days, it was a lot of, we already know the best practices, we're fine. Now being able to kind of say, no, this is all brand new. I'm going to use the specter of AI, the specter of Gen AI. I'm going to use that as a reason for a moment to re-educate. Because I even think I just saw, what was it, 2 weeks ago, that Ethan Mullock even said, we don't have a set lexicon yet because things keep changing so quickly. So what used to be an agent isn't necessarily, as we talk about what agentic means today. As a matter of fact, like, and not to plug something else, but we do we just launched AI in Chai, and the whole goal is to educate those who are not necessarily the builders, but are the users and the buyers, to help them understand this is what this is about. You don't have to learn about RAG per se of how to implement, because you can bring folks to help you. And understanding what's important and what's possible, so then they can champion it, or know where to at least start to find things. To where do I find that research? Where do I find that book or those particular things? Because it is a lot, and especially with a lot of the clients we have, they're already maxed out being asked to do more with less. So it's, how do I give you the right amount of education so that you feel comfortable and confident and you can explain it? I think that's the big challenge we have right now, even in the research that came out from House 337 of the AI Impact Report, is people feel very comfortable using it, but they don't feel comfortable explaining it yet. So how do we help them so that it's in layman's terms and there is a comfort zone, and it doesn't necessarily feel like this scary specter of technology?
Yeah, totally. Sorry, just the one thing I would add to that is that definitely from what I've seen, knowledge of AI is not evenly spread. So you'll often find in an organization like one person who's really keen, and then some people maybe have a kind of specialism, even if we're talking about what you could now call like traditional conversational AI, as in NLU based, or even the stuff before that, which I don't know so much about, but the more rules based stuff. People can be kind of expert on that, which are in there are, of course, elements of AI in there, but still then when it comes to generative AI, like I have friends who use it every day, but they don't have a clue how it's working in the background. And you know, that's kind of the incredible situation we're in, that we now, okay, of course you could say there, you know, AI is in so many of the products we use, but maybe the way I would say it is that now people are interacting with AI, as in generative AI like ChatGPT, and they know they're talking with it, they know it's AI, but still for them it's just like, it's kind of like this magic box where they know that they will get a result that's worth their effort, but they don't have a clue how it gets there. And I think especially when working with clients who actually want to build with this, that's quite dangerous, that they see it as this magic box. You know, it puts them into this headspace where it's like, oh, anything's possible. But really, you know, anything isn't possible. There are definite limits, and also what's suitable for you, for your situation, for your users, your customers.
So you mentioned stuff being very fast paced. I was wondering if you've had to if you've been in the middle of a project and had to kind of shift your strategy because something new came out, or I guess how you approach teaching clients like what to use, or the strategy portion of it. And how how you kind of have to be so agile with what you suggest.
I'll share a story of a seismic shift that's happened to us on a couple active projects, and it was just a change in the industry. When we started introducing Gen AI and RAG and having vector databases, one of our biggest fears were the FAQs. Everyone wanted to build an FAQ bot and just had that, and your head would explode on the back end going, you know, thousands of questions and hundreds of intents, and you're like, no. There's ways to start this mission off. And then Gen AI came in for intent matching, and it was easy peasy all of a sudden. We had great ways to match all this up, and it was a perfect uptake for it. So I remember the pivot in our world when, you know, we could use Gen AI for just intent matching on the back end, and it was just a seismic shift for us, because it was the big no-no of things we always, you know, hid in the corners. Like, could we do an FAQ bot? I guess if you twist our arm. But now it's like, this is fantastic. So that was a big shift for us.
For us, we've had shifts where the shift doesn't necessarily come from the technology. It comes from massive organizational change of where it's, you start down one path and things change. There's also I mean, an example, and this is a way back, is we were working on a test pilot where we were using smartphones, and then Google announced they were killing the actions. That was a hard one because it was, we were trying to use phones, natural mobile. That's going to change our strategy of implementation. The thing is that I will say with some of that is it changes implementation strategy, but it shouldn't change the problem we're trying to solve unless we can solve it better. A lot of times we'll look at things from the perspective of how will this scale? How will this live? And that's also where it's important of, it's great to have pilots and skunkworks, but have a plan and a look towards, how do I expand this or scale this? What torture will I put the team that's dealing with maintaining this when it gets on a huge level, which is totally doable right now because we're a 10-person team. But if I'm rolling this out to a larger organization, or just a group of folks who aren't necessarily as savvy, who don't know all the ins and outs, how do I then put that in there? So I think that's some of the strategies too that we think about is, we'll have our requirements. Like, that's where my business requirements doc and func spec are the most important things, because that'll at least tell us the where, and then we can start to adjust the how, especially as things change. And I mean, we also have the change of what happens of, this is also why it's important to iterate, is we'll launch with one use case and we'll say, this is what they want. And then we find out in all the intents and what everyone's asking for, it's like, oh, we've either, you know, we've learned that there's something that was a blind spot that perhaps they didn't know the definition of something, or we've learned that they want to do these 4 other things. Okay, that's going to change what our roadmap looks like, what we tackle next. So I think it's just an element of flexibility, as long as we have the proofs up front that say in prioritization, does this solve our root cause, or is this a red herring that is going to distract us from what we're actually trying to achieve? I think that's like the big part of a good strategy. Lets you say no as much as you get to say yes. And it's really important to know that, so that you can say, we all agreed on these requirements. This is what it's supposed to do. I know this is really exciting. This disco ball over here, it's still a disco ball. Hold on, that's a separate project.
Yeah, I'm going to complement your comments and Susan and AG on this. In terms of technology, we don't have just one technology that fits all the customers, all the industries as well. So although we have all-in-one platforms right now that can enable several channels for several markets at the same time, several countries, I'm saying. But even that, we need to think about what kind of capabilities and features that each company needs to deliver and how to deliver, where and which kind of channel that the company will deliver more value for the end user at the end. So if it's on simple WhatsApp, for example, or on a website, for example, what is the best one? What kind of the platform that we have enabled we enable the chatbot, for example, in this case for both channels, or which one is the best one to toggle. So the platform it's one aspect, and it's not even clear which one that we need to pick at the end. So we need to think cost, of course, budgets, and how exactly what kind of use cases we can deliver, and again think about the long term. That's why it's important to define the conversation AI strategy that we are talking since the beginning. And then, as Susan mentioned as well, how exactly we are going to define the use cases for each company. So each company has different regulated markets as well, different users, different goals at the end. When we are talking about chatbots, especially, we normally think about, hey, chatbot is to reduce costs, right? So we should avoid transfer a chat to an agent. Let's reduce that. Let's try to automate. Let's try to do some self-services. But eventually, for that specific company, that specific use case, we need to transfer. Eventually, just need to collect some information and transfer. If the use case is more related to sales, not exactly customer services, we need to transfer. Eventually, it's better to have a human agent to talk about that specific issue and solve with the person.
Ben, do you have anything?
Well, yeah, I can't really comment on things shifting during a project, but just to add on to what Guilherme was saying, I would say, cutting costs is often the goal that people will have, and that perhaps will drive their strategy. But there are so many other potential things that can happen here. Like basically empowering all of your employees to be much more productive and useful and effective. There's so many other ways to frame what you're actually aiming at. That's just something that came to mind, and something that's also come up recently in terms of things shifting within a project that might affect your strategy. Really, once you've set your strategy, it's achievable, you should commit, right? Unless there's a very good rationale to stop that. You've already committed, you should probably build it. However, what I've been hearing regarding building things that are LLM based is that often, like if it's built with ChatGPT, then when that moves to a new model, it can affect the whole underlying architecture, and that's quite a risk, right? That's something that you really have to factor in, how you're going to roll with those changes that are basically out of your control. You don't have an insight into what's coming.
Yeah, and I'm wondering on this, if you or like anyone else on the panel have like a strategy on how to create a strategy that is taking into account for these possible changes, like specifically to models, because I feel like that's pretty top of mind in this world today.
At this moment, I can't really, nothing comes to mind, and I am super keen to hear if anyone else can recommend anything.
Yeah, we have an approach where we use a list of considerations as we think about the models. Some of our clients, they're locked in. Hey, they're a Google house, but they still always kind of want to know. So we actually keep kind of a running landscape of what's going on with the models. Yeah, it takes a lot of work, but that's what strategists get to do, is kind of stay on that and kind of keeping that rate, rated from a sense of everything from downtime up to cost, understanding those different considerations and impact to your content or your model or any of those things of kind of what's our back out, what if it goes down, and like we kind of have this list of questions we go through during the implementation phase of figuring that out, or even just saying, okay, so this is what they have, let's answer these questions so that we know, like, okay, if it does change, what are we reliant on? Do we have to upgrade that model? But kind of having that in the implementation plan. That's typically where we start to look through that. And again, that's where we kind of put that into the requirements of, is the world our oyster and we get to pick the best model possible for the thing we need to do? Or is it we're locked into a contract with AWS, therefore we got to use Bedrock? Not that that's bad, it's just a thank you for giving me those constraints so we can plan and then act accordingly, or kind of know accordingly where we might have to flex as well, as we constantly kind of have an idea on the pulse of what's going on with Gemini, what's going on with Anthropic, what's going on with all of them, and kind of going from there.
Yeah, and I'd say it's certainly at the bleeding edge for us. It's not something we're talking about with every customer, but there's I think there's going to be a shift between the proprietary models and the open source models. I mean, knowing what I know about software for the past 25 years, it seems the open source tends to win out. And it is more dynamic, and it's going to allow for a lot more. So we're seeing a lot of rise with the Llama model. 405B is pretty darn good. It's able to call tools, and they're adding a lot to it. So I think a lot more applications are going to be looking at the open source models. And we've been doing some work with some interesting players in the market like Samba Nova, who have a cloud offering for the Llama models, and they have a composition of experts with over 200 domain-specific models that anyone can call on now. So it's interesting to see models themselves shifting and playing out in this space, and to see where that's going to end up. Just in general, I'm excited to see as the next guy, but it seems that more businesses are becoming aware of the risks involved with putting all their proprietary business information out into these proprietary models. People are becoming more aware of that from a risk assessment. And there's more options. I mean, right now at this point, there's not a whole lot of options available in the market to look at different models, or who knows about these models. It's all in the scientist's hand and just trickling down to the market at this point.
Yeah,
I guess
so
it all depends. Sorry,
Go
I guess
ahead.
it all depends on the use cases that you have to implement, and budget, of course. So if you have enough resources, technically speaking, and professionally speaking, so human, that will be able to create something using all these models that we have available right now. So you can go with a simple solution that already have some models behind the scenes that you don't even need to touch. But at the end, of course, you need to have some agreements. You need to be aware of some security levels about that data, where that data is being stored. So it really depends a little bit, I would say, from the use case that each company needs to implement, more conversational AI, more AI oriented as well, and then try to define this solution from a platform that already exists that can support, or something that you need to build on your hands.
So it sounds like there's a lot of stuff to stay on top of. Like, things change all the time, new models come out. How do you kind of keep up with all of the latest news? And also, we do have a question from before that's kind of going back to Susan's points about communities and Slack communities. Could you recommend any Slack communities worth joining? And also, like, how do you have any resources, any people you follow that that you would recommend to stay on top of the latest? Susan, you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah, so one of the Slack channels I do belong to, part of it's because I'm an instructor for the Marketing AI Institute. They have made an effort towards not just talking marketing, but also talking AI in general. Part of it, Paul Reitzer and Mike Caput have a podcast called The AI Show. And every week they kind of just run down. And Paul's been growing up in the industry as much as we're along the same timeline. So he brings that through, and they talk through that stuff in a business sense perspective. Ethan Mullick is always just fun because of the ways that he bangs on them. I'll be quite honest. Like, I feel like his goal is to break every model and show us all of those pieces. So I follow him as well. There are a couple other groups that, of course, I'm blanking on right off the top of my head, but different groups along those lines of talking through. I still even creep in on the Open Voice Networks Slack in the ethics group just to see what everyone's working on and what's being shared through there. As well as internally, we have those things as well, where we have like an AI channel where everyone just throws things, or we have a reference channel where, hey, I found this research, I just keep throwing that there. So every time, Reuters, Gannett, Forrester, anybody puts a type of research up, that PDF goes there so we know where to find it.
I don't have a specific source, I would say, especially source of truth, which is really difficult right now. I try to, from time to time, consume different kind of content in media. So from podcasts to books to some newsletters to some podcasts to some live as we're doing right now. So, and then you can see different point of views and then have your own point of view. I remember that when we saw that ChatGPT launched all this generative AI hype, probably you saw several courses from Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and thousands of other schools. Hey, we have a completely learning path for generative AI right now. Microsoft, Google, Harvard, all of them. It's really hard. How can you do all of these courses? Does it make sense to do all these courses as well? There's a huge overlap as well. So if we don't try to split or overcome with all this noise around the AI, especially AI right now, generative AI, we are going to just be crazy. So just calm down, listen different media and content, and then I think try to create your own point of view so you can follow on your piece.
Yeah.
So if Ben doesn't have to do a shameless plug, I'd have to say absolutely Kane Sims and VUX World are my go-to. Kane absolutely has the influencers in the space, and I love his points of view and the way he balances something lighthearted with something so interesting. So absolutely Kane. And the guys over at CDI, Conversational Design Institute, I love what they put out there from sharing with the community and their approach to a frictionless experience. Those are some of the biggest influencers for me.
Thanks, JD. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I'll make sure Kane sends you your check will be in the post. But yeah, thanks so much. I feel like really, for the people who are on, in the audience, to follow us on LinkedIn, pretty soon you're going to start to find who are the right people to follow, or Susan was talking about X earlier as well as a great place to follow the scene. So I think this is actually quite a small scene. If you go to events, you'll start to see the same faces, which is great because then you can, get to know people, get to know, the different perspectives and find really, the golden nuggets of information that are beyond the hype. The stuff that really helps to piece all this together and make sense of it. So that would be, my recommendations. As far as specific Slack channels, I don't know. I used to be part of quite a few and they seem to have all gone quiet. So I don't know what are the good ones now.
Yeah, I think if anybody has like any specific Slack channels you want to recommend, you can maybe leave them afterwards in the comments. But I also still wanted to bring it a little bit back to the topic of like strategy and like your experience with different clients, and ask also, because we all love thinking we're unique, like, and companies certainly do as well. But is that truly the case? Like from your experience, like from a strategy point of view, is it the case that every company is unique, they have different design situations, different products, so you need to like really create strategy from scratch? Or do you start to see some patterns between different setups.
JD, do you want to say?
Yeah, I'd love to. I always pause. I talk too much all the time, so I trying to work on that. So we tend to see patterns when we build out use cases because it winds up being such a great idea. We start sharing with everyone else, and then it's like they say, once you think of the color red, everything you see it everywhere, right? So typically, we see somebody else who's had a great idea and has implemented something, and we build a use case up and show everyone what we built, and all of a sudden we have 5 of the same projects doing that, which makes it really hard to keep them straight. It's a great idea at first, but it's like, was that for Bob, Sally, or Mark, or Rob? And you just get so lost in it. But you tend to see, we do, once we solve something really well, it seems to start coming in, in 3s or 5s or however that works out. But from a pattern, something great will happen in healthcare, and we'll really solve something, and then it's just so great that everybody wants to see it, and then we share it with the community, and everyone starts building workflows of that type. So yeah, it seems to happen to us often. Yeah.
Anyone else have experiences?
If I may jump in, I would say if you're starting with the need, then that tells you where to go. There may be similarities, things you can draw from other projects you've worked on where you're like, okay, can take a bit of that, stick it together. But it just has to be led by real data on what people really need from you. And then you'll see where to go strategically from there. That basically defines where it points you in the right direction,
Yeah, I was just going to add, so our process is similar. Our framework about how we go about it is basically similar of uncover, understand, and then moving into then what's that strategy, what's that implementation, very much, discover, define, launch, and iterate, etc. But the people in the process and the platform underneath, that is where we see the change of where we're at right now, trend-wise. Again, we talked about that incredible enthusiasm we're seeing because everyone's been able to bang on all of the models and see what they can do and then say, I want that for myself. In my organization, we're still moving from individual to team to organizational level. We then see then varying levels of MarTech readiness, which then will change then what we're designing or even what we're implementing at that stage. And it's more of also then we've taken a concerted approach to being able to say, okay, this is the thing that we're going to solve in these pieces. How do we connect that back so we aren't building a little voice silo, as I call that, of making sure that then whatever content we're using, it's socialized and it's used proper. If we go through the effort of structuring content, let's make sure everyone gets to use it and get the goodness from it. But that's obviously going to change then what our remit is. So sometimes that's where that discovery phase or assessment phase is super important of where that readiness is, because then that will dictate then how we're going about it. But I think you can't, just as I'm always saying, you can't out tech your way out of a strategy. You also can't out strategy your way out of bad tech. So we have to kind of look at those two things. I think those are the big resounding themes we're hearing today. I'm optimistic that if you ask me in a year, it'll be a different answer, because as folks are jumping on board and doing the right thing, we'll see different questions.
I think we are eventually looping back to the beginning of the conversation that we start about discovering and education, how to educate the companies and customers as well on this field. At Genesis, I help to define the conversational AI strategy, how exactly the professional service team is going to implement. And we have kind of 3 pillars, so discovery, build, and optimization. And normally when I mention about these pillars and the phases that we have in each of these pillars, I can see if the project will be successful or not, especially when I mention about discovery, so how to educate the customer and how exactly what kind of information that we need from them. So data, as Ben mentioned, and especially the last piece, optimization. So it's really common to completely forget optimization. It's just go live and forget it. So with that in mind, we can see how companies will evolve the conversation AI, chatbot, voice assistants. If without that, so we can discuss later and more about that.
Actually, jumping. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to riff off the optimization. I mean, we've seen so many solutions that were deployed during the pandemic that were shoehorned in to fill a need because people went home and we made something, and technically, according to the support department, it works. Code runs fine. Is it a great customer experience? Well, and I love Susan's. You can't strategy your way out of bad technology.
No.
But there's Sujin asked a question in the chat, who is the best bot building platform? And for me, that'd be like picking my favorite child. I can't go there, but there's certainly, yeah, I understand. I can't be as an integrator, but it's certainly the first thing we sit down with, and great conversational design and understanding what needs need to be to move met. It's not always throw everything out at first and buy my new yellow widget. It's really how can we work with what you have to introduce good conversational design and good workflows, and create a strategy, and then roadmap how to get somewhere to meet your needs, as we now define your needs that weren't identified when we jumped in here and made something work to save the day. So no favorite bot, but it's definitely a time for optimization, to look at what our goals are and then reassess that now that the right influencers have the wheel.
Kind of building off of that, like, what would you consider like success? What would success look like for a strategy, and can you measure that? Yeah, I guess that's the question.
When is
Susan?
Yeah, that's a great question. A successful strategy is one that's going to actually ultimately get us to where we're delivering what it is that's actually needed, not what is wanted. I'll know I've done my job when we're serving both sides and we have success. Now, no strategy is good without measurement metrics of saying what this thing does. But I also pride myself on how often you have to go revisit it. If it is scalable and it is something that remains as a universal truth that stays unchanging as we go through things, look at the core. Now, that's not to say that we might change our approaches or those things, but the things we're addressing, our mandatories, or how we're thinking about stuff, that's where I feel I'm proudest of when those things can go on. I'll be honest too, is when you can start to see a distinct shift in a client, either their perception or what's happening in the marketplace. Nothing's more exciting than, and this is part of the fun of no dig on enterprise, trust me clients, I love you, but with small to medium businesses, you get to see that face light up. You get to see when you start to make those changes, how the direction of the company changes, morale changes, things like that. Some of the work that I've actually done with some of the restaurant industry is how do we help with the workforce problem? And that's not replacing it. How do we get rid of repetitive things? How do we make it easier for them to do their jobs so we can retain the workforce that we actually have, so we can maximize it? Like, that's an exciting thing when I know our strategy is right, when we start hitting against things like that and it starts changing how people work. Those are exciting things to be able to be a part of. And that's where strategy is great. Now, the challenge with being strategy is how you see it when you're writing that strategy or that implementation plan, and then it shifts because of 100 things. Could be everything from a pandemic to we just shut down all of your tech, or we're sunsetting something, or there's something brand new. Is seeing how different it is from what you had in your mind's eye. And sometimes it isn't exactly what you saw, you had imagined, and other times it isn't. I think that's the challenge that comes to, I think the test a strategist medal of how they feel about that over time.
Yeah.
I hope that answered it.
Yeah.
No, I think certainly with a starting small strategy, it's easy to align the goals, right? And to have them very clearly defined up front with that strategy to go along, and lots of milestones. So, moving along those milestones and not trying to race to boil the ocean, that always looks like success for us when there's no scope creep and no dissatisfaction from leadership and stakeholders. That's really the both sides, as Susan said, that you're trying to appease, with the stakeholders making the investment to the workforce working with the technology.
Anyone else?
For me, in conversation AI, actually, any kind of strategy that we need to build at the end, that we need to define, we need to think in 3 different steps. So the first one would be the long term, where would be a little bit more a statement, let's say, or an idea, or a specific goal, business and technical goals. So more on the long term. The mid-term would be the second step, where we need to start define a little bit more clear goals. And then, of course, the short term will be more action, clear goals. Of course, how we need all the execution, as JD mentioned, more milestones that we need to deliver, more clear goals, more actions that we need to be done to match at the end of the conversational AI strategy. So 3 steps: long, mid, and short term.
Ben, anything?
So much has been said. I'm not sure there's much to add. However, I would just say that, if you've got an implementation that is successfully solving the user need, then basically you've done AI well, and you should have a little party and be very proud of yourselves. But also, if there's trust within the stakeholders, and I know that this has already been mentioned a few times, but I think that is so important that they see this as something they can work with, and it's going to empower their organization, and they're like, all right, let's do the next thing. Then you know that this is working really well. If the team who actually have to work with it don't see it as, any of the overhyped stuff like a threat to their job or whatever, but they see it as like, we can use this and this is really helping.
And Ben, to riff off that, I mean, one thing that just popped in my mind is, when it is working well, it should be unnoticeable. I mean, in where we come from, our positioning is moving out the repetitive stuff, the stuff that's mindless, that could be easily automated. And when that goes away, it's unnoticed, right? So that's always a great sign, a milestone of a successful strategy, is when nobody even notices it anymore. It's the friction's gone, and that sounds like success to me.
Yeah, just to add, it's really always awesome when we can hear a client explain the strategy too, or when you overhear people talking from different departments. So it isn't like, oh, what is CX thought of this week? Kind of how, when you start to hear them actually rally to it, as opposed to the eye roll. I've been on both sides of that fence, and that you've got something set when folks actually believe in it and can buy in.
Yeah, I like.
Go ahead.
No, I love from the as Susan, you mentioned about from the workers' perspective and the actual employees in the organization. We work very heavily in the contact center space, and it's always that first meeting when I meet with the greater groups, and we talk, and there's such fear that AI is here to take all our jobs and there'll be no more agents anymore. And then I talked to them and said, I'm going to do those 5 things you find annoying all day long. You're switching back and forth become, and I find you the most valuable part of a brand as their brand ambassador, and I think you should be paid more for what you do. And and they all kind of apprehensive at first, and then they warm up after they start to work with it and realize they are highly valuable. I was posed the question, are agents going away? The topic du jour all the time, and I said, I think they are going much further as a skilled employee within the organization. It's not an entry-level job just answering the phone anymore. These are brand ambassadors and very knowledgeable workers within these organizations. And I think that pay rate and their value to organizations is nothing but going up. So I try to share that message, and they all kind of look at me funny at first, and they go, well, really? And then I explain that, well, all the average handle times for every project I've ever done and implemented this successfully go way up. And they're like, well, doesn't it go down? I'm like, no, you're handling much more complex things that need a human being to do. And that they find that refreshing. By the time I'm done, I've given them a little comfort that not everything's doom and gloom with AI.
So I know
Absolutely.
we're at time. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying absolutely. Yeah, totally agree.
Okay,
Like agents are vital, and we're finding ways that, we're finding the strengths of AI and the strengths of agents, and really it has to be this, unity.
Yeah, definitely. I know we're at time, so I just want to do maybe a quick round robin of if you have any advice for people implementing conversational AI strategies or regular AI strategies. Ben, you want to start?
Sure. Maybe I'll do the plug now and listen to VUX World, because Kane shares a lot of stuff on this. The one thing I would do, though, actually, is read a book which is amazing, and it's not about AI strategy. It just breaks AI down into such wonderfully easy to understand concepts. And the book is called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You, and it's fantastic. It's so well written. And it really helps to just grasp the basic concept of AI, which I think is useful for anyone making their strategy.
Awesome.
I would say reach me, but actually follow us, actually, because at the end it's been really nice to share experience in comments. I was